Welcome back, guys. So today we're going to be taking a look at some compatible controllers for the Super Retro-Cade from Retrobit. Pretty awesome stuff. So we've got several here, Super Nintendo style, and Sega Genesis and Gamecube. Now, if you're accustomed to the original controllers that come with this system, they are not bad, but definitely there's other better options out there as far as like what you're accustomed to. We've previously talked about arcade sticks and how to get an arcade stick set up for this, but some people just want a better controller option. So castlemaniagames.com reached out to me and said, hey, been doing a lot of work on that Super Retro-Cade. You know, I found these controllers to be working on the system. You want to peep them out? And I was like, hells yes, I'll check them out. The one I was most excited about was the USB Scout controller from Hyperkin. I didn't even know they had a USB version of this yet until Castlemania Games had told me. And it was like, heck yes, I love the Scout controller. It is top notch. But we also have several others, and these are all Retrolink from Retrobit. We have a Gamecube style controller, a 6-button Sega Genesis style controller. Pretty cool. And then we also have a standard Super Nintendo style controller. All of these are USB, pretty good stuff. And, you know, we're going to kind of comment on, you know, build quality, the feel behind these, which ones I would recommend, and just see how they perform. So we're going to unbox these and then peep them out on the actual system in a moment here. So here's the Super Nintendo Retrolink controller. And you know what? Despite what I'd heard, this doesn't feel too bad. You know, there's a lot of third-party USB Super Nintendo style controllers out there. And this one, it feels okay. It doesn't feel too bad. Gotta have to test it out and see how it performs, you know, how responsive the buttons and direction pad are. Next up, we do have the Sega Genesis 6-button. Go ahead and take a look at that. It already kind of, you know, the buttons look a little raised to me. Not really sure why they're so high up. I could see that possibly being an issue. Overall, it doesn't feel too bad, but these buttons, they kind of seem a little wobbly and loose. That's not something I'm accustomed to with 6-button Sega Genesis controllers. It almost seems like this button's gonna fall out, but they're all in there secure and sturdy, so it's just they're so tall that they, you know, it causes them to wobble a little bit, and that's kind of annoying, but we'll still see. We'll see how that performs. So that could be interesting. And then the GameCube controller. I've been really playing a lot of GameCube with original controllers, so I'm really gonna, you know, have something to say about this depending upon the quality and how it feels. It does come with a little disc, I guess, for your PC if you're gonna use it on there. And you know what? This feels really good. This really does feel good. So obviously we're going to test all these out on the Super Retro-Cade, but these can all also be used on your Raspberry Pi, RetroPie setups, or on your PC. Anything that supports USB, you're going to be able to use these on your Odroid XU4, and your Recall Box, RetroPie, Launch Box builds. Doesn't matter. As long as USB supported, these are going to work on that. That's a given, but it was more so, hey, these all work on the Super Retro-Cade, so let's test them out and see what to do. Like I said, this was the one I was more excited about, is the Hyperkin Scout, because, man, Hyperkin makes some darn good controllers. You know, the Cadet and the Scout were just amazing. And this, it feels really good. A new styling version, you know, new style version of a classic. So let's go ahead and pop these in and test them one by one on the Super Retro-Cade and give my thoughts. Let's do it. Okay, guys, so we've got the Super Retro-Cade plugged in and ready to test these controllers out. So I'm going to test each one, kind of give my quick impression, and then at the end, tell you how I rank them and how I feel. So first up, we're going to get the Sega Genesis one out of the way. I have already tested all these, so I've gotten, you know, I don't want to on the fly give my impressions. I wanted to kind of put them through their paces and not just do a quick thing here. But going through, the D-pad on this feels good. It bothers me with the quality of the control, the buttons anyway, with the wobbliness. They all kind of wobble, But the thing is they do all function perfectly fine. You have everything able to work. Your mode button is select, so that inserts coins. Your A and B, all that stuff works. Your Y button is going to be your filter button in the main menu. So with this, my biggest thing that I like about it is the D-pad. The D-pad is done right. It feels good. Overall, this controller does feel cheaper to me than the rest of these controllers, and the quality with the buttons just doesn't feel right, especially those top three. They're just kind of wobbly, like I said. It's just apparent. But they respond well. They just don't feel great to me. My biggest thing would be if you're using this for a fighter that uses 6 buttons. And that's why I was really hopeful of this, because it would be awesome. And it works. It works fine for those. But for me, my thumb kind of gets, like, I rest my fingers on here to hit the buttons. And this Z button just kind of, it's raised too high. And it just, with the wobbliness, I just don't like it. It's uncomfortable for me. If you're just playing a game that uses 2 buttons, the bottom button's perfect, no issue. But for me, it's hard to recommend this controller, especially for the price that Castlemania has this at. And I asked about it, like, you know, hey, you know, this is kind of a pricey controller, and it's just the way it is. That's, you know, the pricing on them, that's what they have to go for. This one's going for about 20 bucks. Can be used on the Super Retro-Cade, works perfectly fine, but I am disappointed with the quality behind it, more so these buttons. I could deal with the quality being, you know, lower for not being an original controller. All these controllers are, you know, they're not the highest quality, except for one I think is really legit. 2 of them are really legit, but we'll speak on that more in a moment. So let's go ahead and exit this game. Like I said, it functions, but it's not really doing it for me because of the way those buttons feel on the top. So next, let's go ahead and try out the Super Nintendo Retrolink style controller. And this one, surprisingly for me, I mean, not for me, it's just for anybody who uses this on this, the buttons function exactly the way they are set on screen. They mimic the normal Retro-Cade controller perfectly. Your A button goes forward, your B button goes back, your X opens up filter, selected stuff. Everything functions the way the original controller does. The Sega Genesis one, you know, it's not styled after an SNES, you know, controller, so it's not going to function the same, but you can always change the buttons in the menu. I think that one works okay, but this one, to me, the build quality feels quite a bit better. The buttons, they all respond well, and it feels really legit. There's a lot of third-party SNES USB controllers that are garbage, and they feel like crap. Especially, you know, ones you could find like for $5 or $6. They do their job, but they're not going to last very long. This one, it's kind of in the middle for me. It's not like a, you know, it's not as good as an iBuffalo. It doesn't have that same quality or an 8-bit style controller, but none of those work on this system. So that's why we're more so focusing on what works on the Retro-Cade, even though these will all function perfectly fine on a Raspberry Pi, you know, running RetroPie, Recall Box, or an Odroid doing the same, or even on your PC. So there are options there, but we really wanted to test this out and see how they perform for the Retro-Cade, because there's not a lot of USB controllers that work for the Super Retro-Cade. Now, this one, I'm dwelling on that Sega Genesis controller because I really wanted a 6-button controller for this system when I don't want to use an arcade stick. And I've done previous videos on the arcade stick. They're not plug and play. You do have to change out the encoder or rewire them, but you can definitely peep that out if that's what you want to, you know, get into. If you just want a controller in your hand, I feel this one's pretty good. It feels legit, and it mimics the original controller that comes with the system very well. So this one right now, legit. The next one that, man, I really love the feel of this controller, but there's unfortunately an issue. The GameCube style controller here, I'm going to tell you, I've been playing GameCube a lot. I have several original controllers, and this feels damn near close to an original GameCube controller. On the Retro-Cade, the analog stick, you know, moves you around in the menu. Even the D-pad does as well, so that's kind of neat that it functions that way. Now we have an issue though. None of the, you know, the buttons, all the mappings, the A, B, the filter, and start. Those all function, map to these buttons here. But we don't have anything that functions as a select button, so that is an issue. Works for NES or Super Nintendo games that are on here. It works very well, but if a game requires select, or the arcade, you have to use select to insert your coins. This does not register in any way, shape, or form a select button for this system. So I cannot recommend this at all. If you're hell-bent on using something like this for this system, I mean, you could, but you're not going to play your arcade games with it. So that is a big thing people want to do, is play arcade on here. And this is not going to function for that. Now on PC, if you're using Hyperspin or big box, launch box setup, and you have Gamecube on there, oh my God, this controller is legit. To map this in the emulator for Gamecube, this is awesome. I cannot recommend this, more highly for that. If you're like me and you like to have separate controllers for each system that are pretty similar, if not the same as the original style, this is legit for GameCube on your PC. But for the Retro-Cade, no. For Raspberry Pi, if you want to use this style, which, okay, some people will, but this works on RetroPie just fine. You can map your select button to Z or whatever you want. It functions great, but typically with the RetroPie, I usually recommend Super Nintendo style Xbox or PlayStation style controllers, or 6-button Sega Genesis style controllers over, weird things like that, or more so an arcade stick anyway. So to me, we saved the best for last, the Hyperkin Scout. Now, this one, the buttons aren't going to be mimicked exactly the same as the original controller that came with the system, but that's okay. Like I said, you can always remap things. Even if you have another controller that works, you can remap. But pretty much all it is like the A and B are swapped, the X and Y are swapped, so more like the Xbox style controller. But this thing, it feels good. The D-pad is, out of all these, the D-pad is the best. It just feels great. It has to be said, with new controllers that are, retro style, a lot of people are going to get hung up on that the buttons don't feel exactly the same as like an original Super Nintendo controller. But the thing you have to remember too is typically something like this has been played with for over 20 years, and this is fresh. So these buttons are going to need to get, kind of worn in a little bit. And I'm just here to tell you, for this controller and the other Super Nintendo controller, the buttons, yeah, they could use a little bit of working in, nothing major. You're not going to get arthritis or any kind of cramping or carpal tunnel syndrome from pressing these buttons. Like, you're not like, They respond well, but they are minutely stiffer than an original Super Nintendo controller that has been worked in for 20 years. Give this thing 20 years and it's going to feel just like Super Nintendo controller. Seriously. But just from my previous tests with this and using it now, this controller is tops for me. I really love this on the first version that came out with the Hyperkin Super Retron HD. This was the highlight of that system, and I used it on original Super Nintendo and used it on the Analog NT. And man, this controller is great, especially if you can't get your hands on an original Super Nintendo controller for your classic system. Now, as far as a USB replacement, this to me is freaking awesome. I love this controller. Out of this set, this is the clear-cut winner for me. This is going to be more pricey than most of these controllers at $20. The Super Nintendo style one, the Retrolink, is like $11, $12. And I believe the GameCube one is like $17 to $18, somewhere around there. And like I said, I can't recommend that one for this system, but it is pretty cool for PC builds. This one's my favorite, goes for $20. You can save 10% using my special code Pixel10. Hey, it is what it is. This is my favorite out of the set. The Super Nintendo Retrolink is second place. Really like this one as well. And then third place is going to be the Sega Genesis 6-button. Fully functions, but just I don't like the wobbly buttons, and it's not comfortable for me. But it does functions well. Just want to, kind of give you the pros and cons to everything. And that's where we're at. So if you're interested, link will be in the description. These controllers are just stuff that we know can be used for the system. and maintains all the functions. The GameCube controller does not maintain all the functions we need for this system, so keep that in mind. We have a lot of Retrobit content. Check out my Retrobit playlist to check out the arcade pack add-ons, the arcade stick builds, diagrams, all that wonderful stuff. So appreciate you guys stopping in. Smash that like button. Subscribe if you have not done so already. And with that said, I will catch y'all next time. Peace out. Bye-bye.